The crisp autumn morning at Atlanta International Private Airport held promise and tension in equal measure. Sarah Mitchell strode confidently across the pristine tarmac, her navy blue blazer catching the early sunlight. At 35, she carried herself with the assured grace of someone who had earned every step of her success. Her designer briefcase contained contracts worth millions, standard paperwork for the CEO of HealthBridge Solutions, one of the fastest growing healthcare technology companies in America. This was supposed to be a routine Thursday. Sarah had a crucial meeting in Boston with potential investors, and her chartered private jet waited gleaming on the runway. She'd made this trip dozens of times before, but today would prove different. Thomas Reynolds stood at his security post, his gray uniform pressed and badge polished to a shine. 20 years as an airport security guard had left him set in his ways, and those ways didn't include seeing people like Sarah walking toward private jets. He watched her approach, his face hardening with each step she took. "Excuse me, ma'am," Reynolds called out, stepping directly into her path. "This is a restricted area. The commercial terminal is that way." He pointed dismissively toward the main airport building, half a mile in the distance. Sarah maintained her composure, having dealt with similar situations throughout her career. She reached into her blazer and produced her credentials: pilot-approved identification, security clearance, and private flight documentation. "Good morning, sir. I'm Sarah Mitchell, CEO of HealthBridge Solutions. My flight is scheduled for 8:30 a.m. Reynolds barely glanced at the documents. "I'm going to need to see additional identification." His tone carried an edge that made nearby staff members uncomfortable. "And proof that you're authorized to be here." A young ground crew member named Jason, who had assisted Sarah on previous flights, noticed the confrontation. He shifted nervously, knowing full well who she was but unsure how to intervene. "Sir," Sarah responded calmly, pulling out her phone, "I've already provided the standard documentation required for private aviation access. Is there a specific reason you need additional verification?" She began recording the interaction, a habit she developed from years of similar encounters. Reynolds crossed his arms. "Look, anyone could fake those papers. I'm just doing my job, making sure no unauthorized persons get through." His emphasis on unauthorized hung heavy in the morning air. Sarah noticed other passengers, mostly white executives, being waved through with cursory checks. She pressed the record button on her phone more firmly. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor, please." "My supervisor?" Reynolds scoffed. "Ma'am, I've been working security here for 20 years. I know who belongs and who doesn't." The situation was drawing attention. Several other staff members had stopped their morning duties to watch. Jason, the ground crew member, finally found his courage and approached. "Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Mitchell is actually one of our regular clients. She flies out every Thursday morning." Reynolds turned sharply toward Jason. "Did I ask for your input?" Just then, Patricia Garcia, the airport's head of security, hurried toward the scene. She'd been alerted by another staff member who recognized the situation's gravity. "What seems to be the problem here?" "Ms. Garcia," Sarah said, maintaining her professional demeanor, "I was just trying to board my scheduled flight when Mr. Reynolds here insisted on additional identification, despite my having provided all required documentation." Patricia's face fell as she quickly assessed the situation. She'd been working to address subtle discriminatory practices at the airport, and this incident threatened to undo months of progress. "Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Mitchell is a valued client and has all proper credentials. Please return to your post. We'll discuss this later." Reynolds's face reddened, but he stepped aside without another word. Patricia turned to Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell, I sincerely apologize for this incident. Please, let me escort you to your aircraft." As Sarah walked toward her waiting jet, she felt a familiar mix of emotions: anger at the injustice, satisfaction at handling it professionally, and determination to create change. She glanced at her phone, still recording, and made a mental note to contact her team. This incident wouldn't be swept under the rug like so many others. Instead, it would become a catalyst for the transformation the aviation industry desperately needed. Boarding the jet, Sarah took her usual seat by the window. As the engines warmed up, she began drafting an email to her board of directors. What had started as a routine Thursday was about to become the beginning of something much bigger than a simple flight to Boston. The glass walls of Healthbridge Solutions' new downtown Atlanta office reflected the morning sun as Sarah Mitchell walked through the bustling workspace. 2 years into her company's journey, the transformation was remarkable. What had started in her apartment was now a thriving enterprise occupying 3 floors of a sleek office building. Sarah paused at the customer service department, where 30 representatives handled calls from hospitals and patients across the country. She smiled, remembering when she had handled all the calls herself. On one desk, she noticed a handwritten thank you note from a patient who had finally found affordable cancer treatment through their platform. Miss Mitchell, her assistant Michael rushed toward her, tablet in hand. The team from Mayo Clinic is waiting in the conference room. They flew in early. Sarah nodded, straightening her blazer. This meeting could change everything. Inside the conference room, 5 executives from Mayo Clinic sat expectantly. Dr. Thompson, the chief of operations, spoke first. Ms. Mitchell, we've been watching Healthbridge's progress. Your system has completely transformed healthcare access in the Southeast. We want to discuss a nationwide partnership. Sarah's heart raced, but her voice remained steady as she began her presentation. On the screen behind her, graphs showed how hospitals using Healthbridge had reduced administrative costs by 40% while increasing patient satisfaction by 60%. The Mayo Clinic executives leaned forward, impressed by the numbers. But statistics aren't the whole story, Sarah said, pulling up a video. On screen, a single mother described how Healthbridge had helped her find specialized care for her daughter's rare condition, something she had struggled with for years. The room fell silent as they watched. By meeting's end, Mayo Clinic wasn't just interested. They wanted to implement Healthbridge immediately across all their facilities. The contract would be worth millions, but more importantly, it would help countless patients. After the executives left, Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. She thought about the rejection emails she received just 18 months ago, when many hospitals had dismissed her idea as unrealistic. Now, those same hospitals were calling daily, wanting to partner with Healthbridge. The company's growth brought new challenges. Sarah insisted on maintaining the company's core mission of accessibility even as they expanded. When her finance team suggested raising prices to increase profits, she instead created a sliding scale system that allowed smaller clinics to afford their services. We're not just here to make money, she told her board during a tense meeting. We're here to change lives. She backed her words with action, establishing a foundation that provided free Healthbridge services to clinics in underserved communities. Her dedication attracted like-minded talent. Dr. Lisa Wam, a renowned healthcare technology expert, left Silicon Valley to join Healthbridge as Chief Technology Officer. Your company isn't just talking about making a difference, Dr. Wam told Sarah. You're actually doing it. Together, they enhanced the platform's capabilities. The artificial intelligence system became more sophisticated, learning to predict patient needs and identify potential health risks before they became serious. Hospitals reported that the early warning system had saved numerous lives. One autumn morning, Sarah arrived at the office to find her team gathered around a television. On screen, Healthbridge was being featured on a major news network. The reporter was interviewing a doctor from a rural Georgia clinic who credited their system with keeping his practice open. Before Healthbridge, the doctor said, we were drowning in paperwork and losing money. Now we can focus on what matters, caring for our patients. The camera panned to show patients easily checking in using the Healthbridge app on a tablet. Sarah watched quietly, thinking about her mother. The system she dreamed up in her apartment was now helping millions of people across the country. Healthbridge had processed over 10 million insurance claims, scheduled countless appointments, and made healthcare accessible to communities that had long been overlooked. That evening, as most employees headed home, Sarah walked through the quiet office. On the wall hung the company's mission statement: Healthcare access for all, no exceptions. Below it, they'd started posting letters from patients whose lives had been changed by Healthbridge. She stopped at the newest letter, from a family in rural Mississippi. Their daughter had needed specialized surgery, and Healthbridge had helped them find a doctor and navigate the insurance process. You gave us hope when we had none, the letter read. Sarah touched the frame gently. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, expanding to international markets, developing new features, fighting attempts by larger companies to copy their model. But tonight, she could appreciate how far they'd come and the lives they were changing, one patient at a time. Back at the Atlanta International Private Airport, Sarah's recorded video of the confrontation with Reynolds had already reached her company's legal team. The morning sun climbed higher as more airport staff gathered at a respectful distance, watching the situation unfold with growing concern. Patricia Garcia, the head of security, stood with perfect posture beside Sarah's jet, her face displaying both professionalism and genuine regret. "Ms. Mitchell, I assure you we take these incidents very seriously. Mr. Reynolds' behavior does not reflect our airport's values." Sarah kept her phone recording as she responded calmly. "This isn't about one person, Ms. Garcia. It's about a system that allows such incidents to keep happening." She gestured toward another private jet where a white executive was boarding without any security check at all. "What I've experienced today isn't unique or rare." Jason, the young ground crew member who had spoken up earlier, approached with Sarah's flight paperwork. His hands trembled slightly as he handed over the documents. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I've seen similar things happen before, but I was afraid to say anything." The revelation caught Patricia's attention. "Jason, how often have you witnessed incidents like this?" Her question carried the weight of someone realizing a problem ran deeper than she'd thought. Before Jason could answer, Thomas Reynolds marched back toward the group, his face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. I was doing my job, following security protocols." His voice echoed across the tarmac, drawing even more attention. Sarah turned her phone to capture his return. "Mr. Reynolds, could you explain which specific protocol required additional verification from me, but not from other passengers?" Her voice remained steady, professional, the same tone she used in challenging boardroom discussions. Reynolds faltered, his certainty cracking under the precise question. Other security guards watched uncomfortably, some looking down at their own badges. A few reached for their phones, seemingly checking the actual protocol documents. Patricia stepped between them. "Mr. Reynolds, return to the security office immediately." Her command was firm, leaving no room for argument. Reynolds opened his mouth to protest but thought better of it and turned away, his shoulders stiff with defiance. More airport staff had gathered now, including pilots and maintenance crews. Many were people of color who exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen this before, experienced it themselves, stayed quiet to keep their jobs. Sarah noticed their expressions, reading the unspoken stories in their eyes. A senior pilot, Captain Williams, approached Sarah. "Ma'am, I've flown you to Boston several times. What happened here today, it's not right, but it's not surprising either. Maybe now, with someone of your influence speaking up, things might finally change." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility in his words. She pulled out her tablet and opened her email, quickly typing as she spoke to Patricia. "I'm sending an email to my team. We need to address this systematically, not just here, but across private aviation." Patricia watched the growing crowd of staff, many now openly discussing similar incidents they'd witnessed or experienced. "Ms. Mitchell, would you be willing to work with us on improving our systems? Your experience with healthcare technology could be invaluable in creating better security protocols." "That's exactly what I intend to do," Sarah replied, finishing her email. "But first, we need to understand the full scope of the problem." She turned to address the gathered airport staff. "If anyone has experienced or witnessed similar incidents, my legal team will be here tomorrow to document your stories. All statements will be kept confidential." The pilot announced that they needed to leave soon to make the Boston meeting. As Sarah prepared to board, she noticed Reynolds watching from the security office window. His expression had changed from anger to uncertainty, perhaps the first crack in a lifetime of biased behavior. Patricia handed Sarah her card with a direct number. "We'll fully cooperate with any investigation. It's time for real change." As Sarah settled into her seat, she reviewed the recording one last time before sending it to her team. The jet engines hummed to life, but her mind was already racing ahead, planning the steps needed to transform this moment of discrimination into lasting change. What had started as a routine flight was becoming the catalyst for something much bigger, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever stood on that tarmac feeling unwelcome in spaces they had every right to occupy. Sarah's private jet landed in Boston 3 hours later, but her mind remained focused on the morning's events in Atlanta. Instead of heading straight to her investor meeting, she sat in the terminal's private lounge, surrounded by open laptops and talking rapidly on her phone. "David, I want a full investigation," she told her head of legal affairs. "Not just about this morning, but I want data from every private airport in the country. Incident reports, complaints, security footage, everything." She paused, listening to his response. "Yes, I know it's a massive undertaking. That's exactly why it needs to be done." Her assistant, Michael, worked at a nearby table, coordinating with Healthbridge's data analysis team. Within hours, they had created a secure portal where airport employees could anonymously report discriminatory incidents. The response was immediate and overwhelming. "Ms. Mitchell," Michael called out, his eyes wide at his screen, "we've received over 50 reports in just the first hour, and they're not just from Atlanta." He turned his laptop to show her the incoming data, reports from New York, Los Angeles, Miami, and dozens of other cities. Sarah nodded grimly. "Pattern recognition," she said, more to herself than to Michael. "Just like we did with healthcare disparities." She pulled up Healthbridge's original code, the one that had revolutionized healthcare access. With some modifications, similar algorithms could track and analyze discriminatory patterns in aviation security. By afternoon, she had postponed her investor meeting and assembled a virtual task force. On her video call screen, faces appeared in squares: aviation experts, civil rights attorneys, tech developers, and security specialists. Among them was Patricia Garcia from Atlanta, who had immediately agreed to help. The problem, Sarah explained to the group, isn't just individual prejudice. It's about inconsistent protocols, unchecked discretion, and lack of accountability. She shared her screen, showing a preliminary analysis of the morning's incident. "We need standardized procedures that leave no room for bias." The team worked through the afternoon. Sarah's healthcare background proved unexpectedly valuable. Many of the solutions they developed for medical access could be adapted for aviation security. They began designing a new system that would standardize security checks while tracking any deviations from protocol. But technology alone isn't enough, warned Dr. Thompson, a diversity consultant on the call. "We need to address the human element: training, awareness, cultural change." Sarah agreed, thinking of Thomas Reynolds' face when confronted with his actions. "We'll develop comprehensive training programs. Not just sensitivity training, but practical scenarios, real-world examples. Make it impossible to ignore or dismiss." As evening approached, her phone buzzed with a message from Jason, the young ground crew member from Atlanta. He had convinced 15 other airport employees to come forward with their stories. Each account reinforced the need for systemic change. Sarah called an emergency meeting of Healthbridge's board of directors. Some members questioned whether this new initiative fell within their company's scope. Sarah stood firm. "Our mission has always been about access, removing barriers that keep people from what they need and deserve," she told them. "Whether it's healthcare or safe travel, the principle is the same. We have the technology, the expertise, and the responsibility to act." The board ultimately approved the creation of a new division, Aviation Equity Solutions. Sarah appointed Patricia Garcia as its first director, recognizing that change needed to be led by someone who understood airport operations from the inside. Late that night, back in her hotel room, Sarah received an unexpected email. It was from Thomas Reynolds' daughter. "My father was wrong," she wrote. "Your response to his actions shows true leadership. Instead of simply demanding his firing, you're working to fix the larger problem. Thank you." Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhausted but determined. On her laptop screen, the number of incident reports had grown to over 300. Each represented someone who had faced discrimination, been made to feel unwelcome, had their dignity questioned. She opened a new document and began typing. "Aviation Equity Initiative, Phase 1. The words flowed easily as she outlined their approach: data collection, protocol standardization, training programs, accountability measures. This wasn't just about one incident or one airport anymore. It was about transforming an entire industry. As midnight approached, Sarah finally closed her laptops. Tomorrow would bring investor meetings, legal consultations, and countless decisions. But tonight, She had laid the groundwork for change that would reach far beyond that morning's confrontation on an Atlanta tarmac. 3 months after the incident, the Atlanta International Private Airport looked remarkably different. Sarah Mitchell stood in the newly redesigned security area, watching as the first phase of her aviation equity initiative took shape. Digital screens displayed clear, standardized security procedures, and every interaction was recorded and monitored. Thomas Reynolds sat in the newly created training center, his expression focused as he watched a simulation on the screen. The man who had once blocked Sarah from her flight was now part of the pilot program for reformed security training. It hadn't been an easy journey. His initial resistance had slowly given way to understanding. The hardest part, Reynolds told his training group, was admitting my own biases. I kept saying I was just doing my job, but I wasn't treating everyone the same way. His honesty surprised Sarah, who observed the session from behind one-way glass. Patricia Garcia stood beside her, taking notes. "He's become one of our most dedicated participants," she said. "Sometimes the strongest opponents become the best advocates once they understand." The training program, developed by Sarah's team, combined virtual reality scenarios with real-world examples and data analysis. Across the airport, new technology was everywhere. Security checkpoints now used Healthbridge's modified artificial intelligence system to ensure consistent screening procedures. Each officer wore a body camera that fed into a central monitoring system, analyzing interactions for potential bias. Ms. Mitchell, called Jason, now promoted to Assistant Security Coordinator. The monthly reports are ready. He handed her a tablet showing detailed statistics. Incident rates had dropped by 70% since implementing the new systems. More importantly, passenger surveys showed equal satisfaction rates across all demographics. Sarah walked through the terminal, noticing the subtle but significant changes. New signs in multiple languages welcomed travelers. Security officers represented diverse backgrounds, and their interactions with passengers followed clear, consistent protocols. The tense atmosphere that had once existed had been replaced by professional efficiency. The transformation hadn't been easy. Some veteran officers had resigned rather than adapt to the new system. Others, like Reynolds, had initially pushed back against what they saw as unnecessary changes. But the data was undeniable. Standardized procedures not only reduced discrimination, but also improved overall security effectiveness. "Your mother would be proud," Dr. Chen said, joining Sarah at the observation deck. Her first investor had flown in to see the changes himself. "You've taken a personal injury and turned it into institutional change." Below them, a group of security officers gathered for their morning briefing. Sarah recognized faces from different backgrounds, all wearing the same uniform, but no longer forced to conform to the same old biases. They reviewed the day's protocols on their tablets, another innovation from Healthbridge's technology. The Aviation Equity Initiative had spread beyond Atlanta. 5 other major private airports had already adopted the program, with dozens more in talks to implement it. Sarah's team had created a scalable model that could be customized for different locations while maintaining core standards of fairness and accountability. "Ms. Mitchell," Reynolds called out as she passed the training center later that day. "Could I have a moment?" She paused, remembering their first encounter. "I've been thinking about that morning, about how wrong I was. But more than that, I've been thinking about all the other times I didn't even realize what I was doing." Sarah listened as he continued. "Yesterday, my granddaughter asked me what I do at work. For the first time, I felt proud to tell her that I help make sure everyone is treated fairly. That's different from just saying I keep people safe." The afternoon sun streamed through the terminal windows as Sarah prepared to board her flight to New York, where another airport waited to implement her program. This time, every security officer she passed followed the same professional protocol. No extra questions, no added scrutiny, just consistent, respectful procedure. Patricia joined her for a final walkthrough. "We're not perfect yet," she admitted, "but we're getting better every day. The culture is changing, not just the rules." As Sarah's plane took off, she looked down at the airport below. From above, it looked the same as it had that fateful morning 6 months ago. But inside those buildings, a quiet revolution had taken place. Security officers like Reynolds had learned to confront their biases. Young employees like Jason had found their voices, and travelers of all backgrounds could move through the space with dignity. Her laptop opened to the next phase of the initiative, expanding the program to commercial airports nationwide. The transformation that had started with one confrontation was spreading, changing not just procedures but perspectives, one airport at a time. The grand ballroom of the National Aviation Conference in Washington, D.C. buzzed with excitement. 1 year after the Atlanta incident, Sarah Mitchell stood backstage, reviewing her presentation notes. On screens throughout the room, statistics told a compelling story. Airports using her Aviation Equity Initiative reported a 90% reduction in discrimination complaints. And now, please welcome our keynote speaker. The announcer's voice boomed. Sarah Mitchell, founder of HealthBridge Solutions and creator of the Aviation Equity Initiative. The applause was thunderous as Sarah walked onto the stage, remembering how different things had been just 12 months ago. In the audience, she spotted familiar faces. Patricia Garcia sat with a group of security directors from major airports across the country. Thomas Reynolds, now a senior trainer for the initiative, sat with his family, including his granddaughter who wore a junior security officer pin. Jason, recently promoted to National Program Coordinator, managed the live stream of the event. Change doesn't happen in isolation, Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. What started as a response to one incident has revealed a universal truth. When we fix broken systems, everyone benefits. She clicked to her first slide, showing improved security efficiency rates across participating airports. The data was impressive. Security clearance times had decreased by 40%, while threat detection accuracy had improved by 60%. Airports reported higher employee satisfaction and reduced staff turnover. But the most significant changes weren't just in the numbers. During the Q&A session, a security officer from Miami International stood up. "Before implementing your program, I was ready to quit," she said, her voice emotional. "The old system forced us to make judgment calls that often came from our biases. Now, we have clear protocols. We do our jobs better, and everyone feels safer." The initiative had spread far beyond private aviation. Commercial airports had started adopting the system, and international airports were showing interest. Sarah's team had created versions of the training program in 12 languages, while the AI security monitoring system adapted to local regulations and customs. After her speech, Sarah walked through the conference exhibition hall. HealthBridge had set up a demonstration of their latest innovation, a virtual reality training module that let security personnel experience situations from different perspectives. She watched as a group of airport executives tried the system, their expressions changing as they experienced familiar scenarios from new viewpoints. Ms. Mitchell called a voice she recognized. It was Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman from her first healthcare fair years ago. Now she served on HealthBridge's Community Advisory Board. "Who would have thought that helping me find a doctor would lead to all this?" She gestured at the bustling conference. The media had dubbed it the Mitchell Effect. How one company's approach to healthcare access had transformed airport security practices. Universities were studying it as a model for institutional change. Other industries had started reaching out, wanting to learn how to implement similar reforms. During lunch, Sarah sat with a group of international aviation officials. They discussed plans to implement the initiative at airports in Europe, Asia, and Africa. The challenges varied by region, but the core principle remained the same, creating systems that worked fairly for everyone. "The beauty of your approach," said a director from Heathrow Airport, "is that it doesn't just address discrimination. It actually improves the entire security process." Others nodded in agreement, sharing stories of how the initiative had solved problems they hadn't even recognized as systemic issues. Later that afternoon, Sarah visited a small exhibition booth where Thomas Reynolds shared his story with a group of security officers. "I was the problem," he told them honestly, "but I was also proof that people can change when given the right tools and understanding." As the conference day ended, Sarah received news that Congress was considering legislation to make key elements of the Aviation Equity Initiative mandatory at all U.S. airports. The proposal had bipartisan support, with lawmakers recognizing that standardized, fair security practices benefited everyone. Back in her hotel room, Sarah opened her laptop to find hundreds of new messages. Security officers sharing success stories. Travelers reporting positive experiences. Airport managers requesting information about implementing the program. Each message represented another ripple in the growing wave of change. She clicked through photos from participating airports. Diverse security teams working together, clear signage explaining standardized procedures, passengers moving through checkpoints with dignity and efficiency. The transformation that had started with one confrontation on an Atlanta tarmac had grown into a movement, changing not just protocols and procedures, but hearts and minds across the aviation industry. 2 years after the Atlanta incident, Sarah Mitchell stood at the window of her new office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The plaque on her desk read, Aviation Equity International, Global Headquarters, reflecting how far her initiative had grown from its controversial beginnings. On the wall-mounted screens, live feeds showed airports worldwide using her standardized security systems. In Dubai, a hijab-wearing businesswoman passed smoothly through security. At London Heathrow, an elderly sick man in a turban received the same professional treatment as everyone else. At Atlanta International Private Airport, where it all began, Thomas Reynolds was conducting a training session for new officers. Ms. Mitchell, her assistant, called through the intercom, "They're ready for the global broadcast." Sarah straightened her blazer and headed to the conference room. Today marked the official launch of the International Aviation Standards Act, making her equity protocols the required standard at airports worldwide. The room was filled with screens showing faces from different time zones. Airport directors, security chiefs, and aviation officials from 6 continents. Among them was Patricia Garcia, now the Global Director of Implementation, and Jason, who had risen to become Chief of Operations. 2 years ago, Sarah began, we faced a choice. We could treat discrimination as isolated incidents, or we could recognize it as a systemic problem requiring a systemic solution. She paused, letting the automatic translation system catch up for international viewers. Today, we celebrate not just new rules, but a new culture in aviation security. The statistics backed her words. Airports using her system reported 0 discrimination complaints in the past 6 months. Security efficiency had improved by 85%, while passenger satisfaction scores reached record highs. More importantly, security officers reported greater job satisfaction and clearer sense of purpose. During the broadcast, they crossed-legged to Atlanta, where Thomas Reynolds stood with his team. When Ms. Mitchell first introduced these changes, I was their biggest opponent, he admitted to the global audience. Now, I train others to see what I learned. That fair, standardized security makes everyone safer. The ceremony included testimonials from around the world. A South African airport director described how the system had healed historical tensions. A Japanese security chief praised how the AI monitoring helped maintain consistency across shifts. An Australian passenger shared how air travel had become a dignity-preserving experience for Aboriginal communities. After the broadcast, Sarah received a surprise video call. It was the elderly woman from the health fair years ago, the one who had first inspired HealthBridge. "Look at you now, baby," she said proudly. "From helping people find doctors to helping them fly with dignity, you've really done it." Later that afternoon, Sarah visited a local airport for a routine inspection. As she walked through security, a young black girl watched her with wide eyes. The girl's mother whispered something, and Sarah overheard her name. She stopped to talk with them. "My daughter wants to be like you when she grows up," the mother explained. "She says she wants to build things that help people." Sarah knelt down to the girl's level, remembering her own childhood dreams. "You know what's amazing?" Sarah told the girl. "You won't have to fight the same battles we did. When you fly, this is your space too. Never let anyone tell you different." She handed the girl her business card, watching her clutch it like a treasure. Back in her office that evening, Sarah reviewed plans for the next phase. HealthBridge had grown into a conglomerate dedicated to equity in various sectors: healthcare, aviation, and now expanding into education and housing. The methodology that had transformed airport security was being adapted to address systemic barriers in other industries. A notification popped up on her screen. The last airport in North America had just completed implementation of her system. The map on her wall now showed a complete network of connected points, each representing an airport where every passenger could expect the same fair, professional treatment. As the sun set over Manhattan, Sarah thought about that morning in Atlanta 2 years ago. The angry security guard, the discriminatory treatment, the choice she'd made to create change rather than just demand it. That moment could have remained a painful memory. Instead, it had become the catalyst for a global transformation. Her phone buzzed with a message from Thomas Reynolds. Just finished training the 1000th officer this year. Thank you for showing me a better way. Sarah smiled, knowing that somewhere, right now, someone was walking through an airport feeling exactly what they should feel, like they belonged.